coming in, and I'm going to let them in. And then we'll start in a minute or two. Admit them all. Hi, Joel. Dodd. Skip Klein looks like he's floating in there.
Hey, George, how are you? I'm having dinner
Well-
with my wife,
Okay.
but I'm really looking forward to this. One of my favorite things is Mike Mandel's cards, the baseball cards. I have this
Oh, yes.
collection upstairs. I just love it, Mike.
Well, thank you.
And I've met a few of those people. You must have done it years ago.
Oh, yeah, that was 1975.
Ah, you were a kid. Did Chantal assist, or had you met Chantal at that point?
No, that was definitely another life, different
Got
life.
it.
I'm not that old.
Yeah, yeah. You were born in what? Just
55.
8 years before that. 8 years after that.
You were married to Sultan before then, right?
That would have worked out really well.
You think?
Great projects together.
Hi, Sandy. And hi, John again. I don't know if you heard me the first time.
Hello, Janan. Sandy. We got some Bostonians, at least. We got a couple of Bostonians that are here.
A couple of Minnesotans. Well, there may be other people who wander in the next minute or two.
Oh, John from LA. That's great.
Hi, John.
Well, Mike and Chantal are joining us from separate undisclosed locations in the Boston area. They never travel together. They're like the president and the vice president of the United States. You know, they travel separately in order to protect the democracy that they represent.
And neither of us have the nuclear codes.
Right. Well, you have the odd numbers and Chantal has the even numbers, and that's how that works. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be welcoming people. I know some of you, but my name is George Slade, and I am a writer and curator and historian of photography, and I'm based in Minneapolis. I crossed the river from my birthplace in St. Paul, and it has been a remarkable journey ever since. Mike and Chantal are known to many of you for various projects. We have a very complicated, well, to my mind, complicated and wonderfully densely complicated book to talk about tonight. And I'm going to encourage Mike and Chantal to introduce themselves as we learn about the book, because it is a very personal story and a very densely cultural and political story as well. Before we start, I'm going to admit Lisa Kessler. Just by way of introducing you to the book and to the fact that these two wonderful artists spent about 12 years putting this book together. I'm just going to say that that the State of Ata, which is the name of the book, was conceived as a collection of books within a book. It's a photograph album, a volume of military portraits, a diary, a photo novella, And the result is a unique project that will appeal not only to those fascinated by Turkish culture, but also to anyone interested in the popular representations of cult historical figures. Now, when I met Mike and Chantal, I wasn't sure which of these people I was. If I was interested in Turkish culture, I guess I had to say that I didn't know a lot of Turkish culture. And in working with these two, I've developed some knowledge that I didn't have before, which I thought had been very enlightening. Sorry to be soft pedaling the reality here, but it was really quite an adventure on opening up this material with Mike and Chantal. So you guys will have a lot to share with us, and so I would like to just toss it over to you, and let's get started.
Chantal, you want to start or you want me to start?
Go for it.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll just say that Chantal and I, we had met a couple of years previous to starting this project, and we were looking for something to do together as a collaboration. I, just like George mentioned, I missed out on the Ottoman history of the recent times, the Ataturk's drive to push out all the European influence after World War I. That wasn't really covered much in high school. The journey of Turkey to get to the point where it was a secular country. Mustafa Kemal was a general in the Turkish army who kind of organized all of the Turkish forces that were still to his avail once the First World War was over, and basically was heroic in that he pushed out all these other European forces out of central Anatolia. And I knew nothing about this. And since then, since 1923, when it was the initiation of the Turkish Republic, Ataturk as this heroic figure that galvanized all the forces and that changed the whole tenor of what Turkish society would be, because he had a real strong commitment to secularism and to the West, more so than what the Sultan was about back in Ottoman times. So Ataturk's status as this very significant, man of independence has been chronicled across the country with all of these statues that are, in homage to his being there, to his producing this history. When I learned about this, I thought, well, this is pretty amazing, considering that all of the things that are happening in the Middle East, all of the rise of political Islam, which is re-engaging people's social energies to kind of reinterpret what the social polity might be. And perhaps that might change the issue of Ataturk. Maybe this guy who really believed that the West was what the future was about was going to change. Maybe all these sculptures are going to go away. That was the first thing that was hit my mind. Let's go and make a document of all of these towns that have their central square, where there's I think Chantal mentioned to me that you can't create a town in Turkey unless you have an Ataturk sculpture in the village square or the town square. I mean, that you don't qualify as a town unless you do that. That really kind of blew my mind, that you could travel anywhere, and there's the first thing you could do if you get to town, if you wanted to, you could just lean out the window and say, "Heykel nerede?" which is, where's the sculpture? And that would mean exactly that. They tell you where the Ataturk sculpture is, because that is the sculpture. And
yeah. Chantal, you grew up with this mythology.
Yeah. So we were looking for an opportunity to go to Turkey and stay a long time and do some kind of photographic project. I think I had first thought about this when I was in grad school, when I would come to the States to study, and then I would go back to Turkey and be with my family, drive around. And that's when it kind of like clicked to me that this is a really bizarre phenomena. You know, when you grow up in it, you don't realize it. It's part of the landscape. And, you know, you don't realize that every single sculpture in Turkey is an Ataturk sculpture. There is no other sculpture. I mean, now recently there are more, but if you are in a town square and you say, where is the sculpture? Everybody knows that you mean the Ataturk sculpture. It's not like there is another leader. And so, you know, there is this thing about being outside of your country and recognizing what's going on and seeing it with a fresh eye. But when Mike and I started this project, and I was telling him about this phenomena, he thought, oh, this is totally crazy. This is really a weird thing to do. But for me, it was very normal. This is how you grow up. I think the essence of the project and the reason why this was such an interesting connection for us is that he was really the outsider and I was the insider, and I had to explain a lot of things for him. I had to kind of give him a lot of background information, but on the other hand, he was pointing out a lot of the things that were really bizarre that I had never noticed that they were that bizarre.
When you guys published this book in 2010, I know we're flashing way back. This is a trip in the time machine. You self-published this, and you guys had a history of being able to do self-publications. This is kind of a massive book to have self-published, 292 pages, I think. And it's just so dense with information. As I said, it's a collection of books within a book. Do you guys think that you could have, that if you were to publish this book today, that you would have found your own publisher for it, or would you still be self-publishing this?
Well, I think if we could do a 400-page book, we could have probably filled in 400 pages because we had so much material. Because part of it is that we started in '97, we stayed there for 3 months. And then, of course, you know, my family is still there. So we keep going every year, and we had more and more material. In the meantime, we started designing the book, but we didn't know if we could publish it or not. And so a lot of things were indefinite and unclear. And even at some point we thought, well, maybe we'll never be able to publish this because either it's too expensive or it's not going to be easy to publish it with the Turkish government changing and everything we want to say in the book. How are we going to navigate that complexity? You know, I want to still be able to go back to Turkey and do things. And so maybe it's not worth it. And so that ended up being 13 years. We also had a daughter. So I think that also slowed us down. And we were working on many different projects and teaching and.
Well, then I think, you know, we were talking before we started that, you know, we did find a publisher who was interested in doing it. But I think, as is the case today, when you find a publisher, that's sort of half of the job, because oftentimes the publisher is looking for you also to provide some of the cash that's going to go into the project, so that they kind of guarantee that they don't lose anything. And so then we were kind of thinking to ourselves, well, you know, if we're already going to put up money and they're going to really not take any risk, why don't we just do this? We can do this. We know how to do this. I mean, Chantal is a graphic designer. She teaches, you know, how to make books. So we could do it ourselves. And it was actually a lot of fun to do it ourselves, because we got to go and watch it on press and just be involved every step of the way. So, you know, I think there's certainly an advantage to having a publisher who's going to do the marketing and the distribution, which obviously we did find a distributor, so that took that away from our list. But still, it's, you know, we've got to, what I'm trying to say is we do have a basement full of books of various projects, and that's what happens when you self-publish. You've got all the inventory stored for the rest of your lives.
There was a question from Skip, whether the book is still available, and
oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, you can get it if you look at it on Amazon. DAP, which is the distributor, they still sell it directly through Amazon. You can always get it from us. We have our own website if you want to just look up thecorner.net That's
Right.
us. So you could find all the books that we have for sale. But
Right.
yeah. Yeah, it'll get one more out of the basement.
One of those boxes that has yet to be touched, right? So I don't know how many people here, I mean, have seen the book. I mean, show a hand if you have. So I think it'd be great if we can dive into some of the page spreads, and let's look into that the story we were discussing before about the march, the protest march, not the parade, protest march.
Did you want to talk about the dig article we did
Yes,
to
yeah,
introduce the
Yeah,
concept?
just as a way
Okay.
of sort of framing, I guess, the discussion about Ataturk.
Yeah, Mike, you want to start talking about this?
Well, this came sort of late into our thinking about, how to do something other than the book or other than an exhibition. We thought, well, it'd be interesting if we did something that would be in a newspaper. And so here in Boston, there's the Dig, which is like an alternative newspaper. And so we were able to get them to understand what we were up to, and they gave us a page that we could design, and they just donated the page to us. And we were going to make an analog basically about how Ataturk is the sort of the father of the country in Turkey, and that's pretty well accepted. Whether you're a secularist or as an Islamist, you still see Ataturk as the father of the country. So we decided to kind of play it out as if here in the US we had that same kind of idolatry or commitment to the image. And the only image that we could come up with that had any close connection would be George Washington's portrait, the unfinished portrait. And then we took that on as a project, and we found a copy of it, framed it, brought it to friends' houses, brought it to different shops, because when you would go in Turkey to people's homes, you would see pictures of Ataturk. If you would go into the barber shop, or if you went to the meat store, wherever you would go, you go to the post office, there's just pictures everywhere. So we thought if we could just invade Boston with imagery of George Washington everywhere, and then make a page that suggested that this is the return of the father. This is the people are, there's this groundswell of excitement to bring back the image of Washington as a way to, I guess maybe we were thinking of unifying the nation, which really we need right now. I don't think we realized how much we needed it then,
Right.
but that's what this was. This was a kind of a document of our joking sacred hero.
And one of the great co-optings in this is that that you really just switched the name of Washington out for that of Ataturk.
Right. Some of these quotes are actually real quotes at the very end, where somebody did tell us something similar to this in Turkey about Ataturk. And so all we did was kind of switched it to make it about Washington.
Right. So instead of Washington, it'd be Ataturk. Only you can bring our country back together again as one nation.
Well, I think the statement at the bottom here where it says, the other day, my younger son asked me if it was acceptable to touch an Ataturk sculpture. This made me really angry. Who teaches him these things? Of course you can touch an Ataturk sculpture. There is nothing sacred about him. That's the actual quote that we got about Ataturk. And she was a lawyer who was coming from a very strong secular background, who kind of turned her attitude around by becoming a very strong spokesperson for the Islamist cause as a statement about democracy, because there was an argument to be made that within Ataturk's society, there was no place for religious expression.
Right.
And that needed to be changed.
So let's get to the march.
So now let me start with the book. Did you want to talk a little bit about the street pictures that we made, Mike?
Well, I think if you show these, I'm going to just talk about all the different things we did. And
Right.
it may not be in sync with the photographs, but I think that's okay.
Yeah, like where George talked about this being a book within a book. So as you list those things, I'll try to find the images in the book.
Well, I have a list here of all the different things that we included in the book. So I think I'd like to be just sort of comprehensive right now to just describe that obviously we made photographs. And one of the first thing we made photographs of were the sculptures. And this is one of the last sculptures that's in the first section of the book, where there's sort of a diminutive image of Ataturk, if you want to go back to that one, Chantal. And the intersection of the electricity or the power thing in the background, and the minaret of the mosque, and then the flame, I guess, which is part of the city, kind of make him more complicated. He's not really the main issue anymore. There's a lot of other things that are kind of changing around him. It looks as if that maybe that sculpture was installed before all these big things happened, before, after the Islamists did come to power in the early 2000s, the construction of mosques became unbelievably supported. There were just hundreds and hundreds of mosques being built all over the country in the fairly recent time. So a sculpture like this probably existed even before that mosque was there. It looks like it's fairly new. But anyway, so we made pictures of all the sculptures. We made pictures of all of the Ataturk portraits that were in shops, of all the Ataturk busts that were at schools. Every public school had a little golden bust in the front of the school. That was like, there were hundreds of them everywhere we went. We made sure we got those golden, we call them the golden boys. We made pictures of all the various ceremonial spectacles, the Independence Day event, the Ataturk Day event, the Ataturk Death Day event that would take place in stadia, where there would be kids holding these placards. You see right now, like these placards in stadium, these are like individual kids holding up an individual pixel, which is just a big piece of cardboard that's painted a various color to produce these grand, spectacular crowd stories, these events for the crowd to enjoy. We made pictures of the antithesis of the image of Ataturk, which was the appearance of the scarf, the hijab, the charshaf. The hijab is kind of the uniform of the scarf and the trench coats. The charshaf is the more extreme version, which is the black. Well, maybe you would recognize the term the chador from Iran, but that here it is, the charshaf. Those kinds of images became really important to serve as a counterpoint. I mean, here you've got pictures of Ataturk in relationship to the charshaf.
Can I also point out something else?
Yes.
Is that not only here you've got a symbol of secular Turkey with religious Turkey, but the picture that is chosen here is also very significant because he's praying, and those were pictures that were almost unseen when I was a kid and growing up. Whereas when the Islamists came to power, then more of these images of him praying became visible to the public.
Right. Yeah, the Islamists could not just get rid of Ataturk. What they had to do was reinvent Ataturk so that he would become sort of the grandfatherly forebear of indeed, religious culture that spans back centuries. When before the Islamists came to power, there were other images that were found that you wouldn't see, maybe a more snapshot picture of Ataturk in a bathing suit, and that would be like an advertisement you'd see on a billboard for advertising bathing suits at a department store, where people would just thought that was really kind of amazing to see these more intimate or informal photographs of Ataturk. I'm going to just go on with if I could, I want to go on just with all the categories, and then we can kind of fill in some of this stuff.
Do it for 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes, because George wants to go into the hotel plan.
Anyway, I got down to the photographs. There's videos. There's our own personal diary of what we were doing every day when we were there. There's a photo novella that we made when we did a performance called Taxi Rides, where we were in a taxi, which we'll describe later if we have time. There's children's drawings of Ataturk that we collected. We visited 3 different archives trying to find all the extant information and photographic material of Ataturk. We did social interventions, performances, which we have 4 different performances that we did while we were on this project that are in the book. We did interviews with people, of historians and Islamists and just regular people who had personal memories, older people who actually remember him. And then we included something that Martin Parr might have appreciated. We found a commercial photographer who was making photographs of soldiers who were going off to the army or the Air Force or the Navy, and they would come there and they'd have their picture made, and they would have all of these amazing exotic backgrounds. Like you see this image of the guy in his army uniform with his girlfriend or wife. If you go back once, Chantal, back one, yeah, of the center one with the Hawaiian background. And we've got the military reference and the kind of the uniform of the Islamist woman all together, because the army was a big deal as well up until the last 20 years. If there was an issue in Turkish politics where the government was problematic, the army would usually intervene via a coup and start over again, make a new government. That the army has been kind of neutralized since Erdogan took power. So I think those are all these kinds of things are in this book. There's all these ways of getting at the
different
issue.
different ways in.
Yes.
So let's talk about the hotel project.
Sure.
Because that's one of the setups that's going to get to the heart of the book. So in every hotel room that we stayed, because we traveled the country very, very slowly, actually. My family used to make fun of us. A distance that would take most people 5-6 hours to drive, we would do it in 10 days. Because we would stop in all the small towns and just spend a couple of days everywhere. So in every hotel room that we would stay, we would leave a picture of Atatürk, either on the wall or, on the table, on various parts, and then we would make a photograph of it. And that would speak also to the aesthetics of the kind of rooms that we were staying in, and it gives you a sense of the local aesthetic, but also of the kind of hotels that we spent the night. And we had a bunch of these pictures. We had a whole bag full of them. And then the last one we made was here, actually, in Ankara at our hotel. And Ankara is the capital, so it's a fairly big city. And as we are gathering our stuff and putting our suitcases into the car, we noticed that there is a protest outside. And Mike thought that this would be a really great opportunity to actually juxtapose a picture of Atatürk with the Islamists that were protesting. Background information, but it may not even be relevant here. The Islamists were protesting the 8-year extension of the public school system, because that would mean that conservative religious students would have to stay in the public school system and get a secular education rather than be able to go to a religious school. So we thought that this would be a good opportunity to make a picture. And of course, if we had a bigger photograph of Atatürk, that would have made even a better picture. But as it turns out, all we had were these little frames. And Mike found, well, maybe Mike, you want to talk about where you found a spot in the crowd to photograph?
Yeah, I think, well, we were trying to run to get ahead of the crowd, and it was kind of getting toward the end of, actually the protest occurred, I think, in 5 different locations in Ankara. This was just one wing of it. But we did finally get to a place where there was a pretty good vantage point where I could climb up onto a light pedestal, kind of a big street lamp pedestal, and look down on the crowd and get a picture of Chantal. And I try to get Chantal to angle herself a little bit toward me. But right next to me on the same street lamp pole was a Reuters videographer. He was making a video, and he seemed to be really interested in what Chantal was doing as well. We didn't realize that that meant anything. And I took about 6 pictures, and the protest was over, and we just left. And we thought that was the end of that we got a picture.
We actually left Ankara. We weren't even in Ankara, but what we didn't know, is that what you were going to say?
Go ahead, you can chime in.
What we didn't know is that this was only the 9 a.m., 10 a.m. Initial protest, that eventually 2 p.m. in the afternoon, there were thousands of people that gathered in Ankara, and the protest turned really violent, and the police got involved, and the police actually was beating the secular media. And so there was a lot of clashes that were happening on many different levels. There were the Islamists, the police, who is now by that time infiltrated by the Islamists, and the religious media and the secularist media trying to document this event. So a lot of people had a voice in this event. That night in the news, not much happened because everybody was trying to figure out how to tell the story. But the next morning in the newspaper, we woke up and we started picking up some of the newspapers, and the image was front page. And in fact, here, I don't know if you can see it clearly, but they're comparing the photograph to Tiananmen Square. And at that point, the image turned into a symbol of secularist Turkey versus Islamist Turkey. Did you want to say anything else, Mike, before I move on?
Well, I just was going to say that a couple of things, but I'll just reserve that. I think, everything kind of went crazy at this moment where we didn't realize that this had become such a big event. And it not only was it being covered by all the different, whether it was the secularist press or the TV or the religious media, but people were trying to find Chantal and I. They were, we had already left Ankara, and we were in a little town in Göreme, which is a place where a lot of people go, a lot of tourists go to look at some of the old Christian caves. But somehow somebody found us. I don't remember how they found us, but there were all of a sudden a number of people from the press that were kind of stalking us and hiding behind bushes, taking pictures of Chantal, and it got a little insane. We then just approached some of these people and said, all right, let's just do one press conference for everybody, and then we can just get on with our life. And that's what we did. But for about 10 days, this is what all the news was all about. It was really a very interesting story because none of the press really realized who Chantal was. And Chantal, you should just come in and talk about, your family here and what the origins of your family are. Talk about that. Chantal, are you there?
Ooh, she's been hidden.
All right, I guess I will talk about it. Chantal is not a Muslim. 99-point-something% of all Turks are Muslim. But Chantal's family has been in Turkey for 9 generations. So they think, they consider themselves part of the culture and part of the history. So this actually opened up a whole new ballgame for the press. How are they going to deal with this? Once they found out Chantal was not a Muslim, how is it that the daughter of the revolution, Chantal, could be holding up the picture of Ataturk and being representative of the Turkish secular statement when she's not even a Muslim? How could that be? The religious press all of a sudden felt like, okay, this girl is probably working for the CIA. She's probably Jewish. She's probably this or that. I mean, they didn't realize that I was Jewish. If they knew that, then maybe that would have been a clear indicator of where she was coming from. But it kind of blew up where she was a wild card and she could really represent anything for anybody. I think when we did the press conference and we kind of got it all out of our chest as far as what we were trying to do, we talked about what we were going to do. We were interested in the image of Ataturk. We were interested in understanding the symbolism of what it meant to various people in Turkey. That's what we were there, collecting experience. And we left, it was done. We got a call from the hotel lobby that someone had made a call to make sure that we were still there at the hotel, because they wanted to make sure we were there because they were an old friend from Ankara that was going to drive down to see us. Well, Chantal has no friends or relatives in Ankara.
Ooh.
And we realized at that moment after the press conference that now it wasn't just, in the press, and it wasn't just our immediate family, but it was like millions of people had seen us, had heard this, and knew where we were. And we had to get the hell out of there right then and there. So at that point, we just got up at 4 a.m, beat whoever was coming to visit us and get back to Izmir, which instead of taking the 2 weeks it normally would have taken us, we did it in about 6 hours. But then everything really went crazy because we were, when I say we, I mean, Chantal was extremely recognizable as we walked down the street. Izmir is where she grew up. There's a lot of people that in the Al-Sanjak neighborhood that knew, that grew up with her. But there were people that had no memory of her, but who had just seen her image on TV and in the newspapers over and over and over again. So that we would walk down the street and people would just run up to Chantal and kiss her and give her flowers. If we were in a taxi, we would not be able to pay. If we were in a restaurant, they wouldn't let us pay. It was just kind of incredible that she was like the Princess Diana of the secularist Turkish world. And Izmir is one of the more secularist secularist cities in Turkey. Chantal, are you back now? Can you talk?
There's the
Yes.
glamour shot of Chantal.
I've been kind of filling in you, but how did you
I'm
feel
sorry.
about that?
Well, I think, did you talk about how scary it also was?
Yeah,
I mean,
I talked
it
about
was
how we had to
really,
get-
I think it was really humbling to have, people show their affection and their recognition and their allegiance to secularism, because it didn't really become about me or Mike or the photograph. It was really about the allegiance to secularism versus the allegiance to the Islamist agenda. And so, if the taxi driver was giving us a ride for free, it was a very humbling moment where, this guy really was committing to how much he believes in the secularist agenda. But then when we would get anonymous letters or, bottles thrown at us, it was also terrifying because, you don't know what's going to happen next. And it was very nerve-wracking. So in a way, it also stopped our project. Like we couldn't really, here's a page, actually, I should show this. So, here it is, her plan to divide the country. This is big, huge, headline on a national newspaper. So one newspaper here says she has been nominated for the Atatürk Peace Award, and another newspaper claims that I am a CIA agent because naturally, I live in America, and so that would be the reason. And then, they were interviewing my father. Then the mayor of the city started talking. And then what came out is that, well, am I really a Turk or am I not a Turk? And that was the big question, is this idea of ethnicity, which is pretty interesting in the sense that with Atatürk and with secularism, the need to unify Turkey made it that the Turks, when they learn or when we learn our history, there isn't a lot of emphasis on ethnic differences that create today's Turkey. And, a lot of, it has been a mythology that was created with the revolution that there is a Turkish ethnicity that unites them all, whereas there is the Bulgarian Turk, then there is the Caucasian Turk from the Caucasus, then there is the Turk that is from the south, the Kurd, the different religions. So there is a lot of nuances that got lost in this effort of unifying the country in the 20s that built to this new religion. And so to this new reform.
Well, that was definitely a strategy on Atatürk's part to create a unified feeling that wasn't there before, where you have all these ethnic minorities that maybe didn't relate to each other until he decided to create this kind of fake Turkish nationality.
Right.
So it's not just minorities, it's that the entire country is very complex in its ethnicity due to the Ottoman Empire and how the Ottoman Empire was spread around. So,
I was going to say
in
that,
a way.
Oh, Chantal, I was going to say that with this slide up, it kind of gives us an opportunity to think about 7 Turkish artists, because I'm looking at 7 images here that have all been rendered in different fashion of the same person. And they all seem to have been rendered according to someone's agenda, perhaps, or someone's need for the symbol of Ataturk at a particular moment in time.
Right. So that discussion led us to talk more about nationalism and how then Ataturk becomes a symbol for the national agenda. So I can stop actually this and we can share images from the exhibit. Mike, maybe you want to give an
Right.
introduction to the exhibit while I'm looking at everything
Well,
else.
and let me just say that it was a real pleasure for me because I met Chantal and Mike and said, well, we really have to do an exhibit of this work. And lo and behold, we created an exhibit at the PRC, or advanced an exhibit that had been earlier done at Kennesaw, that had almost nothing on the surface to do with the book, but had everything to do with the representation of ideology and power.
Yeah, well, the exhibit, and I guess this is a chance just to thank George and our appreciation for getting us involved in the opportunity to do this show, because it did just open up, more ideas about how to talk about how to talk about these ideas. I mean, we were, here we were a few minutes ago talking about just the abundance of his image all over the country, and that there's maybe a dozen different ones. So like the postcard rack only was Ataturk postcards. And all of them were different. But those, you could go around the postcard rack and you could just see every single different image there, and there's plenty more than just the ones that we chose. So there was a sculptural event of the opportunity to do the postcard rack. We did these busts. I'm not sure if that's next, the busts here, because of the golden boys, as we talked about, being at the entrance of every public school. We decided we would take one of them. We actually bought one of them in Turkey and brought it home, and then we had it cast so that it could be cast then as a resin sculpture, with the image that we made in the background of Ataturk as a sculpture that had been removed. I think the image of the sculpture removed seems a little bit debased because he's on a bunch of old automobile tires, which makes it look like he's cast aside, but it really was just a kind of a resting place before they were going to put him up. I mean, the sculptor was done with the project and they were just in the municipal lot. But anyway, the overabundance of all these busts was an opportunity to make a little alcove about that. We also I don't know where exactly we got the idea, but we realized that the way to romanticize the image of Ataturk would be to turn him into a painting. And I think we had seen another artist who had been doing paintings in China by sending photographs or other images to these companies that would make these very inexpensive paintings. And so we took that opportunity to outsource the idea of paintings to Chinese artists, which we thought would be pretty interesting. It did turn out very interesting, and that some of the Ataturk portraits, not the ones you see here, but the ones that just show him more clearly, he does look a little bit more like Mao. In some of the translations, they have that kind of Mao look to them. So Chantal, I think you're bringing that one up close. That was one. There's the one where we get to the two that are dueling.
I don't think I have that. But this one is actually a pretty good depiction, because it also kind of showed us how these Chinese painters, because there were many with whom we were working, recognized the language. They recognized the visual language and they were responding to it. So it was kind of like a nice dialogue to have. In fact, when we exhibited this show, we also had the names of the painters who created these paintings.
And they were Turkish artists too.
For the moment.
So the word Turkish artist came from our very first show at Kennesaw State, which was not called Seven Turkish Artists, actually. It was called something about Seeing Ata, I think was. It was pre-book. The book had not come out yet. But this one woman walked into the show and said, "Oh, are you the curators? This looks like a group show." And that kind of triggered something. And then when we did the PRC show, we thought we should really call it 7 Turkish Artists, because the pun here is that you wouldn't be able to find 7 Turkish artists who would do, you know, any critical work about this visual material, because it would be either censored or it would be, you know, sponsored by the government. And so you either had to be on one end or another. So we thought it was kind of humorous to call it 7 Artists, because there were many different approaches to the work that we were showing.
Someone made a comment earlier on saying, aren't the sculptures supposed to be representative of all Turks?
How so?
I'm
I mean,
not sure.
they're all sculptures of Ataturk.
Right.
I mean,
I'm not
I
able
think
to see the chat here.
There's a comment that says, didn't he say we resemble ourselves? Biz benzeriz, excuse my Turkish.
Well, so his mythology is very extensive. You know, he said a lot of things because he's also, he was a very wise person. He also knew how to use the media very well. One thing that we found out through the archives, for example, is how well he knew how to use photography. This was really the beginning of the printing of magazines. And so he would use the press and photography and publications to spread his reforms. And so it all coincides to that same time period. And so he did say a lot of things, and now a lot of what he said has been also mythologized and aggrandized. And like we said earlier, both sides, the Islamists and the secularists, use his image to continue the mythology. Because for the Islamists, it would not be a smart move to contradict what Ataturk was saying. So instead, they go along and they reinvent the personality. There's actually a really great book called The Cult of the State. Is that what it's called, Mike? Do you remember? Or
I can't remember.
The Cult of the State. That talks about Ataturk and the imagery in a very academic way.
I would love to encourage anyone who has questions or who would like to join the discussion to unmute themselves and chime in at this point. There's so much to cover, and I just want to be sure that we hear from people who might have some relative questions.
And I can stop sharing. Do you think that's better?
That's probably a good idea at this
Yeah.
point. Thanks, Chantal.
Well, I just wanted to kind of state the obvious, because it's such an incredible story that you set out to document this figure that is so representative of this movement and this identity of Turkey, and then you yourself interjecting yourself for a whole different reason become a similar figure in the story, and like, you know, totally unpredictable. And that's just such an incredible phenomenon that you don't know. You have no idea what you're going to interact with when you start down a journey like this, and probably wouldn't volunteer for it if you knew it was coming. But
Right. You
yeah,
became a
such an
hero in
incredible
spite of
story.
yourself, Chantal.
Well, I think part of it, a lot of it had to do with being young and not fully understanding also what we were getting into. So I think that's part of it. But the other part is also, like, there are, you know, you want to start an art project not knowing the answer and not knowing the ending, right? If you know it right from the beginning, then it becomes very didactic, and then it becomes really you trying to convince the other person one way or another. And we approached this project in a completely open-ended, non-didactic way. And I think this is where it was a little harder for me, because obviously I grew up in secular Turkey and my allegiance is to secular Turkey, but I could also see how the secularists were very oppressive towards the Islamists. And one reason why the Islamist movement became so powerful was because there were some kind of crazy rules, like you can't go to school with a headscarf. And so if you are a religious person, it's not like here in America, anybody could wear anything they want, right? Or you can't walk into a government building with a headscarf. And so, you know, to some degree that makes sense because we want to preserve secular Turkey, and to some other degree, it doesn't make, it's not a democratic way of approaching everybody's voice and wishes, right? And so our approach was to kind of like separate ourselves from that battle and to kind of look at the imagery and look at its significance and look at how it gets transformed because of that battle. And I don't think at the onset we knew that we were going to be this far deep into the understanding of the imagery.
Chantal, speaking of imagery, I just wanted to mention or remind everyone about the book that you just did called Drop Dead Gorgeous, which is an imagery of our foe, the SARS-CoV-19 coronavirus. Such an amazing collection of pop imagery about this immensely influential figure in our last couple of years of life on this planet. And it does have one of the best titles of a book I've heard in ages, Drop Dead Gorgeous. Anyway, sorry to interject, but I just thought that was an appropriate parallel.
Thanks
Yes.
for the plug. I think it's hard to make the transition from the state of Ata to Drop Dead Gorgeous because there's so different in,
It's
but
such
it
a
is
force.
yeah, it is a collection of another icon.
Well, exactly.
Hi, can I ask some question? Also, I love your book, Chantal, right here, because George recommended it, so I have it. So I'm familiar with Orhan Pamuk, right? And I love his books. And he just got in a lot of trouble, I think, for insulting Ataturk, although he is a strong secularist. Are there many other artists in the same position as you are that's happening? You know, and maybe not even, you know, on purpose as it happened to you. You're like the accidental political art.
Not at all. I think, you know, there is a very strong tradition of art making in Turkey. There is excellent art that is being made in academia, in the way artists are trained. So in 1997, we actually gave a lot of talks in various universities, and what we were seeing was that sculptors especially, and that's in the book, it was kind of sad in some way, but also very interesting, where these very smart grad students who are sculptors and want to invent their own form and their own interpretation. One of them said, you know, I am perfecting the image of Ataturk because I know that after I graduate, that's where I'm going to be able to make money. And that's, you know, I can make my own sculptures in my studio, but really public art is just Ataturk's image. And so I want to perfect that. So that's one thing, is that the reality is that you get a good education, but in practicality, you know, if you want to have a commissioned sculpture, you better know how to make a sculpture of Ataturk. But then on the other hand, there is the Istanbul Biennale that really transformed Turkey and art in Turkey. It really opened it up. There was a lot of interesting and subversive art that was shown at the Biennale. And the government tolerates it because in a way it's a parallel universe. Not everybody goes to see the Istanbul Biennale. You know, it's kind of like art galleries. Not many people go to the art galleries. So not many people know what's going on there. And so there is a lot of things that happens at the Istanbul Biennale that you would not expect to be showing in Turkey. And yet, because that's under an international umbrella, because a lot of other countries are watching, then that's tolerated. And so there are now, compared to 1997, there are quite a lot of artists that are doing very interesting and very subversive work.
Right. Now, Mike, to extend the impossible metaphor in your direction, I was just thinking about the pop culture icon that you dealt with in your recent book, maybe pop and photo culture icon.
Yeah, this would be the first time one would ever connect Ataturk with Ansel Adams. But we'll do it tonight. Yeah, you're referring to I just finished a book that's my opportunity to play with Ansel Adams' archives, his various archives. Yeah, and it was really a great opportunity, I think, because I had done previous books where I used the archive. I guess the best known is Evidence, where Larry Sultan and I looked at archives of places that made high technology weapons or space material or other governmental concerns, where we had looked at about 100 agencies of archival material and looked at 2 million pictures and came up with photographs of these people made that seemed to represent the places where they came from. So because I did Evidence and I'd heard Ansel Adams speak about the same time Larry and I were doing Evidence, where he was going to donate all of his work to the Center for Creative Photography and make it available to artists and scholars. I was thinking right at that moment when we were doing Evidence, I said, I wonder what that would be like to look at Ansel Adams' archive, because all we know about Ansel Adams is just kind of like this. It's the transcendental landscape, the incredible spirituality of being in this virgin space of Yosemite or the High Sierra, or that's if you think of Ansel Adams, there's about a half a dozen pictures, and they are what they are. But if you imagine that this is a man who had a very rich life and he had all kinds of opportunities to make other kinds of pictures. He had to work for a living, actually. He couldn't just sell his landscapes when he was young. So he was having to work on commission for magazines and various companies who needed documentation of their projects. So I looked at thousands of pictures that no one's ever seen of Adams, and most of them would be ones that we wouldn't care too much about. But I could find all kinds of pictures that he made which seemed to be like moments when he was not really having to do this, but maybe he had a few hours time to do some pictures that he was interested in while he was at the copper company making documentary pictures that were kind of interesting to look at. So out of that, I found some really interesting ways to make facing page relationships, juxtapositions, make a whole sequence of things that remind me a little bit of, or I'm thinking about Evidence when I was doing this. And of course, Ansel Adams has this kind of status as this father of American photography. Ansel Adams was instrumental in the first director of the Museum of Modern Art's photography department. He set up the photography department at San Francisco Art Institute. He started his own gallery. He organized his wife's gallery in Yosemite to sell all the work. He was just kind of like this entrepreneurial mover and shaker of photography of his time, as well as documenting the Japanese American experience at Manzanar, which I felt like I really wanted to do something to change up how Adams had been kind of misunderstood. I think a lot of people look at the pictures he made there of the Japanese American experience and looks like he was an apologist for the US government's treatment, when he was anything but. He was really one who was just trying to figure out how to make the dominant white culture appreciate the fact that Japanese Americans were just like us, we'll say, if we were back in those times. Right. It was a bad strategy, and the pictures look a little bit like their propaganda, but they were really intended to try to, so what my book was trying to rectify that and make a little bit more of a pointed, harsh, sardonic statement about the imagery that is all made with his photographs. I chose different pictures than people normally would use.
Right. No, you found some wonderful pictures of his friend Edward Weston's son. Was it Cole or I can't remember.
Cole Weston, right?
Right, Cole with his sweetheart, and there were some really really forced if I may say so, really forced looking portraits at the door, sort of businessman going off to work or.
Well, I think what you're referring to, there's a fun little story, I'll just make it quick, where he was commissioned by Fortune magazine to do a story about the aerospace industry in LA. And this was in 1940, before we were in World War II. But I guess Fortune knew we were going into World War II. I guess they knew that because all the aerospace companies in LA and everywhere else were building airplanes to sell to the British and the French. They were already in war, and we were making lots of money off of it. So anyway, Adams went to LA, photographed Lockheed, photographed, I can't remember, other LA-based aerospace firms. I think they used a couple of his pictures in the story, but he had 200 and some negatives that he made. And in the 1960s, he was kind of cleaning out his archive, his personal archive, and he just didn't know what to do with these things. So he contacted the LA library and said, I've got these 200 and some negatives and prints. They're worth about $150, or they're worth about $100. would you take them? And they wrote back and said, well, we'll give you 150. And he gave them to him for $150. So now they're on the web. You can get all those pictures he made in LA, and some of them that I found that were of Cole Weston and his wife, Dorothy, where it looked like, if you look at the picture, it looks like he's a street photographer. And he's just taking a picture of these young lovers who are embracing behind the screen door of their house. And I thought, when I saw that, I thought it was like Ansel Adams, Ouija. How did that happen? They come together, but it made sense. He was photographing his friends because he was trying to photograph life in LA for Cole Weston was working for Lockheed for 58 cents an hour. He was building aircraft back in 1940. So that's why he used him as a friend to stand in for the everyday worker.
Thanks, Mike. Any other questions, comments, observations?
Well, I would just ask, what's next on your agenda? You've done some really different things. I mean, molecules and Ataturk and stuff in between, Adams. So
Well,
what are you working on now?
Shelter and Plates was a great collaborative work you guys did.
Yeah, well, we could list all the past things. I think the hard one is
what's
to
coming
list
up?
the future
Yeah,
things.
forward,
Which anyway, for me, I'm just not hurrying up to try to figure out what's next. It'll happen one way or the other. What's been really nice is the opportunity for Chantal and I to work together on various projects. And the fact that we are husband and wife, and that we share studio space, and that we can argue about things, and we can, we come from really different backgrounds. It's really made it a really rich experience for me as an artist to be able to work with Chantal. So I hope we get to do more stuff together.
You make it sound so easy. You make it sound so romantic and so easy.
Well, it's Valentine's. It's the season of Valentine's. I hope you guys were together last night, even though you're not together tonight.
Yeah, I'm working actually on a project where this last summer I was fortunate enough to be part of a teaching group that through Tufts University offers a degree program at a prison, and I taught an artist book class there, and my students made a lot of books, but one project that we decided to do is a collaborative piece where I asked them if there was a place that they would want me to photograph. And so they would give me an address and kind of a diagram of where I should stand and how to photograph the building. No people involved, just spaces and buildings. And in some cases, they even drew a little design as to how they think the photograph should look like. And so I went and photographed, and then I brought that back to the class, and they each wrote something about the image and their reaction for in seeing the image. One guy sent me to his childhood home, and this guy had been inside for 25 years. They sent me various places, and it was also an opportunity for me to know more about their lives and where they grew up and what happened to them. So now I'm kind of compiling their writings, and maybe I will write some too and put it together in a book. I don't think this is going to be a widely published book because of the nature of the work. So I don't know exactly what form of public form it's going to take.
Well, we look forward to seeing it in whatever form it does take. Chantal and Mike, thank you so much for sharing the story of Ataturk and your collaborations. And it's been great to see everyone.
Thanks, George. Thanks for inviting us, and
yeah.
Thanks so much.
congratulations on your book as well. So
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was going to put in a plug for myself, not about my book, but about the piece that I wrote for Black and White Magazine, Mike, about Zone 11. So that's coming up in a month or two.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to that. It better be good.
Same. All right. Thanks, everyone. Good evening. We'll see you
Bye, everyone.
in March.
Thanks
Mona
for coming.
Bloom is our speaker in March.
Love you.
Thank you.
Bye,
thanks for
all.
coming. Bye.
My
Bye-bye.
favorite artists.
Hey, John, thanks for coming.
Love you, man.
Same here.
Thank you.